So welcome. My name is Greg Mannix. This is the Fundraising Bootcamp. We'll be talking today about some strategies for getting ready for your fundraising campaign, maybe kicking off in January during the JPM events. I am Chief Conference Officer at Life Science Nation. My background for many years was working in the medical device field, mostly in Europe, but I worked in the US and Latin America pretty extensively. And I've been at LSN for about 5.5, almost 6 years now. And I think, the fundraising space is a really exciting place to be. And that's what we do at Life Science Nation. We help connect early stage companies with investors, and we do that in several different ways. So today I'm joined by my colleague Karen Dio. Dennis Ford unfortunately had something last minute come up and won't be able to be on the bootcamp. But the bootcamp is based on Dennis's book, Fundraising Manifesto. It's a book that I'm happy to send out to you after the conference, after the bootcamp today. But basically, what we're going to talk about today is based on what's in the book, and that's available to everyone. So, Karen, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So, hello everyone. My name is Karen Dio. I am a Director of Investor Research at Life Science Nation. And my background is mostly in science. I have a research background, but I really wanted to branch out into I learned a lot about commercialization and the process of transforming a technology into a business, and the branching the bench to an actual product. So I've been at LSN for almost 3 years now. And I'm really excited to take part in this, and I will be leading the part of the discussion where we go over partnering events and how to really get on the radar of investors and how to go about that.
Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to send your question in the chat box, and we will address those at the end of the bootcamp. We're also happy to share these slides with you. So feel free to reach out to either Karen or myself if you would like to have a copy. Okay, so first I'd like to give a brief introduction of who we are and what we do at Life Science Nation. Life Science Nation is a company that was created in 2012, and we've created a global infrastructure based on several different activities. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but basically I would just say that we have data platforms that help connect the buyers and the sellers in the life sciences market. And out of those relationships from our data platforms grew the Redefining Early Stage Investment conference, the RESI conference series, that started off as one conference in 2013. And last year we did 6 conferences around the world. So as you can see on the map here, we start in San Francisco during JP Morgan. We do a conference during Bio. We do a conference in Boston every fall. We did one in Europe for the first time in 2019, and in Asia, both in Shanghai and Taipei in 2019, also for the first time. So we've really built this global infrastructure that has helped a lot of companies find the right partners, and we're very proud of that. And I find it very rewarding when I hear about companies that have used our tools to make the connections that lead to them getting funded and eventually bringing a technology forward that will improve people's lives. So this is what we do. Just to give you an overview, the conference series will start in January during JP Morgan, as we do every year. What's different is this year, instead of a Resi conference, which was a one-day in-person conference, of course, we've had to pivot to digital like everyone else. But now the Health Tech Partnering Week is our new event. It's a 5-day long event where Resi is 3 days long, the Redefining Early Stage Investment Conference. And that includes panels and workshops as well as intensive partnering over 3 days. And we've added 2 new conferences that have a specific focus. So one is called 4D Meets AI, Drugs, Devices, Diagnostics, and Digital Health, and how AI is impacting all of the verticals in life science. And the other conference is called Longevity, Health, and Innovation. And this is a conference that we're doing for the first time in January, but we will be doing this 1-week Health Tech Partnering Week program 4 times next year. Okay, so let's jump right into fundraising. I just want to go over a few main concepts and also some myths that are out there about fundraising that we will try to debunk, and hopefully you'll find some value in this. So 3 important questions. Are you actively raising capital? And if so, how long do you think it takes? And that's really important because you have to plan your finances and your fundraising around the calendar and around the timing. You know, every company has a runway with their current funding, and if you're wrong about how long it takes to raise money, you can run out of runway, and this happens very often, unfortunately. And then the third question, you know, how much does it cost? You need to raise money, of course, but it's not free to go out and raise money. There are a lot of expenses involved. And you know, if one good thing has come of the pandemic, that is that, you know, a lot of the expenses around fundraising have come down because you're no longer able to travel to conferences, to meetings, etc. And the cost of conferences, digital conferences, is considerably lower than the in-person ones. So there is some good news. But basically, you know, we advise our clients that about how long it takes to fundraise, that you should count on 9 to 18 months because there are rounds that can be closed in 6 months, you know, even shorter. Occasionally it happens, but it's not the norm. The norm is it takes a long time. Due diligence takes a long time. Negotiating a term sheet and the back and forth and the attorneys, I mean, there are a lot of things that come into play here, and it takes longer. It always takes longer than you think it will. So I guess the advice is plan, you know, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. 9 to 18 months is something that is reasonable, and you know, and then you need to budget some money. You know, we think 60 to 90K for a year of fundraising when you get started. You need to create your branding and messaging and have that. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. You need to create your marketing collateral that you'll be using for fundraising. You'll need to attend conferences. Now, fortunately, that's a lot less expensive. You'll need to take some road trips, also not happening right now. But you will need a global target list of investors to go after. And we'll talk a bit about your different options there. But having a target list is really key. And the bigger that target list, the better your chances of finding the right investors and strategic partners for your project. And then, you know, there are additional miscellaneous costs that all new companies have. So, I mean, you do need to budget some money for fundraising. What's going on in the investor landscape across the globe? It's really interesting to see what players are most active in early stage funding today compared to 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It used to be that after family and friends and grants and maybe some angel money, you really didn't have any other choice but to go to VCs. That was the only other option out there. That's not the case today, absolutely. And we see it at each of our conferences and really, every day as we're talking to investors in our daily work at Life Science Nation. We have a very close relationship with a lot of investors from different areas that are not VCs who are actively looking for investment opportunities in early stage. And I think the most important ones are the big pharma and big medtech companies, corporate VCs, because they have a different structure and a different way of working compared to traditional VCs. So corporate venture capital are also really interesting for early stage companies. Certainly family offices, and we've seen a big uptick in the number of family offices that are active in life sciences. So I think these three are the most important new categories of investors who are really looking for early stage opportunities. And you need to get in front of them. You need to find out who they are, what their investment interest is, and find the ones that are a fit for you and get in front of them, because they are investing very, very early stage. And then to a lesser extent, foundations are changing, many of them are changing their business model to a equity funding model, which is more sustainable for them and allows them to make a bigger impact when they have an exit. So a lot of foundations are either creating a venture arm or are making equity investments in early stage companies. So that's an interesting trend that we're watching as well. And of course, you still have VCs, you still have angel groups, you still have the other traditional early stage funding entities. But what's interesting, what's really positive for you as early stage companies is that there are these new players in the market, and they might be a very good fit for you. So there are some myths around fundraising that we would like to debunk from our experience, working very closely with companies and investors in this space through our conferences and our data platforms. The first one is what I mentioned earlier, that you didn't really have many choices, or you might think you don't have many choices after getting grants and friends and family and angels. But as we mentioned earlier, there really are a lot of other investor groups that are investing early stage. So the ones we talked about earlier, you have to keep your eye on those. You have to identify them, and you have to get in front of them and tell them about your project. And then another common myth, and I see this with so many companies that I talk to, is that they think they need to limit themselves to regional players. So if you're based in Boston, you need to be speaking to Boston-based investors. And if you're based in Europe, you'll probably be talking mainly to investors who are in the particular country where you are. And we think that is really not the case, because there is a lot of cross-border activity going on. And if you find an investor who is a good fit and really looking for your type of technology and stage of development, they will want to speak to you and learn about what you're doing, no matter where you're based. So don't limit yourself to a particular region. We talked about this earlier. Many first-time entrepreneurs think that they're going to raise money in a few months. I've spoken to people many times who say, yeah, I'm going to raise my seed round, you know, by first quarter of 2021, and they haven't started yet. So, you know, if they can do that, fantastic. You know, occasionally there are funding rounds that go very quickly, but usually that's not the case. So be realistic about how much time it might take to get your funding, and be sure to plan for that. It's not necessary to understand how each category of investor works, just go after them all. That's not really the case. You need to understand the motivations and each investor that you talk to will have different objectives, different timelines. It's really important to understand how the different investment firms work. And when you speak to an investor, these are the kinds of questions that you should ask. Karen will talk about planning for your investor meeting in a bit, but there are very important questions about the timeline of investment, the expectations that investors have, the motivations that an investor has in investing in your technology. It might be very different for a corporate VC of a pharma company than it would from a purely financial VC that you might talk to. So it's important to ask those questions and understand what motivates each type of investor. That the science is the only thing that matters to investors. And of course, nothing can be further from the truth. The science and technology, whatever you're developing, is extremely important, of course, and that will play a key role. But investors are investing in you as the team leader. They're investing in the team. They're investing in a project that is well put together and seems to have a future. So, I mean, they're looking at many things, not just the technology. If you have just great technology and nothing else, you won't get very far. So it's a whole package that you have to offer to an investor, including things like, especially the team, of course, the IP, and understanding of the market and where you fit in, what makes your technology special. What steps are you planning, and what milestones are you going to be able to reach over the coming months or years? All of these things will make a big difference. Always good to have many technologies. This is an interesting question because there are platform technologies that are very compelling, and they can be used for many different indications. But for the most part, it's much easier in your discussion with investors, if you can focus on a single product and indication preference or indication for that product, because then you're talking about a single market, a single technology, a single timeline of milestones and things that you're going to achieve. If you are talking about 5 different products that are going after different indications in different markets, it really makes the investment more difficult to more difficult for the investor to understand what is going to happen with the money they invest. What is the timeline going to be for them? It really does make it more complex. So in most cases, we think it's better if you focus on your lead product and your lead technology, and and that particular market, and keep it simple in your outreach to investors. And then you can mention that you have a pipeline of other technologies that could be developed based on your technology or whatever. But focusing on a single lead product is probably more compelling. You need to be referred. This is a really important one. I speak to lots of different people in this field, and many entrepreneurs feel that to reach out to an investor, you really need to be referred. You need a warm referral. And if you can get a warm referral, that's great. That's the gold standard. You know, if you can do that, fantastic. But if you only reach out to the investors that you can get a warm referral to, you're really limiting your possibilities of success. There are so many investors out there who are accustomed to being contacted by companies that are, you know, looking for funding. You can absolutely reach out to them, but if you want to improve your chances, you really need to identify which ones are a fit for you. And we're going to talk about that. How do you find investors that are a fit, who are looking for your type of technology and stage of development? If you reach out to those investors, even you know, without a warm referral, you will have a much better hit rate than if you do a cold outreach to just any investors, you know, from a big list that you might get without understanding their area of interest and what stage of development they invest in, et cetera. So if you can identify the investors who are a fit, you can definitely reach out without having a warm referral. Send investors as much information as you have. Of course, you know, you will have more information than anybody about your project, but what is the right information to send? You can't send everything, and if you do, it's going to defeat the purpose. No investor will read through a 30 or 40 slide deck without knowing who you are or what you do. You really have to hone your message and your marketing collateral so that you know, 10 to 12 slides for an investor deck, a non-confidential deck, an initial deck should be enough. And what I always recommend to people is, you know, have many backup slides available when you do get that meeting, so that you can quickly find the information that comes up in the conversation. If there's a question about the technology, about the IP, about the management team, you can have as many backup slides as you want, but it's important to have a concise initial investor deck, executive summary, and there's another, you know, we think a one-page data sheet is extremely useful for your outreach to investors, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Scientists are the rock stars and don't need the business or finance execs on their team. Of course, that's not true. And yeah, and that the science is what's hard. So you know, these are, you know, some typical myths around fundraising. And you know, I would like to, I hope I have convinced you a bit that these myths are not really true, and that there are many opportunities for funding out there that, you know, no matter what your level of experience is, you can have access to these. And so we'll talk a bit about that.
There are several questions about these myths that we may want to address before we move on.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a question from Ashley Kennedy, how cross-border activity is great, but being in Canada, I've had several investors suggest that we would need an American headquarters. Mm-hmm. And that is I don't know if you want to address this, Greg, but one thing that I can say with all of my conversations with investors is that this is kind of where knowing your investor really comes into play, and knowing which investors will require you to have American headquarters versus who are willing to invest internationally regardless of where you're headquartered. And so this is where really doing your research about the investor before you contact them really comes into play.
That's right, Karen. And that comes back to the concept of fit, finding investors that are a fit. So, I mean, there are some investors that their structure doesn't allow them to invest outside of a certain geographical region. I mean, there are investors who can only invest in Canada. They might have some government money in their funds, or for whatever reason, they can only invest in a limited geography. So that's the importance of understanding, which investors are a fit for you. And one that only invests in a region other than your own, of course, is not a fit. So excellent question. And it does come up, but there are many global investors who will invest in a Canadian company. And it's just a matter of identifying those investors. Any other questions on there, Karen?
Yes, we have a few questions from Ayla Anak. One about is how do you connect at Resi with new players if you don't have upgrade access?
Okay, do you want to answer that?
Sure thing. So Ayla, I'm not sure what you mean by upgrade access, but one thing that Resi allows. So there's the Resi standard partnering and the Resi Premier partnering, but within the standard partnering, even just as a Resi attendee, there's a lot of way to connect with new players. We use the profiles that we create for investors, which Greg will demo later on in this presentation, to really give you a really good snapshot of what these investors are looking for. And that's kind of the whole purpose of Resi partnering, is to give you an idea of what these investors are looking for, so that when you're requesting a meeting, you can already tell if they're a good fit for you. It allows you to do really good targeting, and connecting with an investor either through Resi or even off of Resi by reaching out to them is really an exercise in persistence in a lot of instances. You have to follow up. You have to, do what you have to, play the line between, not going after them too much, but not, giving up after, only a couple of messages. Sometimes it will take several messages to reach them, and it's not always that they're not interested. Sometimes they're super busy at that specific time, and then the message gets, dropped down in their inbox. So you have to follow up with them to kind of refresh their memory. So that's the sort of thing to pay attention. And Ayla, your second question about how we can secure a warm referral as they do not respond without when they ask for the information but not give a meeting or FaceTime. And again, it's the same sort of concept of, you don't need a warm referral. You don't have to secure a warm referral. All you need to do is do your research ahead of time, know that you're a fit, and then be persistent. And know that sometimes they might say, oh, well, they look over the material you sent, but it's not a fit for them, or they're not investing in that at that time. And don't take a no as a failure. You just keep it in mind and keep plugging along.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. All of the investors who come to the Resi conference, and really any other partnering conference, they're looking to meet with companies. They're not looking for warm referrals. They're looking for new technologies. But Karen is going to go over this in a bit when we talk about partnering. Many times the reason you don't get a meeting is because, first of all, you haven't written a message that's compelling enough to get the investor's interest, and many companies don't follow up, and that's what Karen was saying. You have to be very persistent to get those meetings, and you'll see a big difference if you follow the steps that we're going to talk about today. So yeah, excellent questions. Thank you.
We do have a follow-up question from Lawrence Obsfeld. You know, when does it become harassment? Multiple messages on the Resi platform, and also when contacting a VC directly. If you don't have a referral, but it fits the mandate, and you do need to state why you think it is in the mandate. So to answer the first part of that question, you know, the frequency between follow-ups is definitely going to be different when you're doing it outside of a partnering conference versus in, because the timeline is completely different when you're requesting a meeting before a conference versus just in general. You know, we give you essentially, you know, the Resi partnering will be opening on Monday, and that's about 4 weeks or so before the conference. Sending one message every, you know, once a week or so, maybe 5 days apart, I would suggest. You don't want to harass them every day. You know, for if you're doing it off, we would recommend maybe no more than, you know, maybe once every couple of weeks. You know, you can just ping them. The key that we find, you know, is that it's not so much about how frequently you harass them, although you don't want to do it too frequently, clearly how frequently you message them. It's also about the information that you provide in each message. And that's something that we'll also cover later is, you know, if you go at them with new information every time, you might end up finding what ends up hooking them in, but you don't want to just say, hey, I'm following up. That's not sufficient. But again, we'll address that later. And yes, definitely stating why you think you're relevant to them can make a difference. It gives them a notice that you've actually done research, that you know what they're looking at, and that you're not reaching out blindly.
Yep, exactly. I don't think it's ever harassment, as long as you are being respectful. And you know, I have seen some disrespectful messaging from companies being upset with investors, and that's unacceptable. So, I mean, if you're respectful, that's their job, is to interact with companies like yours. And you know, it's all they have to do is answer and say, sorry, that's not an area we're interested in right now. Thanks anyway. And then you know not to reach out to them anymore. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Yep. And one final question that came in from Thomas Argentieri. Will you give some guidance on how early companies can be in development when going to investors?
Yeah, that's, you know, it can be very early stage. We have a lot of, I would say the sweet spot of the Resi conference is seed to Series A. That's where a large percentage, maybe 80% of the companies are in that range, seed to Series A. But there are a lot of early seed stage companies attending Resi and reaching out to investors. And we get a very high number, and this is something that Karen and her colleagues do every day, is interact with investors who are early stage investors and find out if they invest in a seed stage company or not. So we try to make that information available to you through our database and through the information we give you at the Resi conference on the partnering.
Yeah, and again, you know, we cannot reiterate this enough about doing research about the investors. The investors will frequently make it clear in which stages they invest, what minimum they require in terms of data that they want to see. So that's always something to look for when looking at which investors to reach out to.
This is the book that you all will get after this. We'll be sending this out. These are just some examples of companies, I'm going to go past this, companies that have found funding through our platforms. So very quickly, I'm going to show you what we were talking about when we talked about the global target list of investors. So this is the LSN Investor Database, and this is something that Karen and her colleagues worked very, very hard on over the last 8 years in compiling this information about investors from all over the world, as you can see here. And investors, we mentioned earlier that it's not just VCs and angel groups anymore in the early stage investment field. It's, all these different types of investors. So we track them all. And if, you want to be successful, you need to find investors who are a fit for your particular technology. So if you're developing, say, a drug, and you're developing it for, say it's a small molecule for any indication. As an example, let's say cancer. So small molecule for cancer and in preclinical stage, and looking for funding maybe to go into phase 1. Okay, so we can search by geographic exposure. So meaning if you happen to be a Canadian company, because that question came up earlier, we can do a search and we can see almost 400 potential investors who say that they will invest in a Canadian company. So these are the ones who are a fit for you. And these investors will do cross-border investment. So just as an example, you have a corporate VC. That's one of the types of investors that we talked about as being a really, really great type of investor for. Hang on, Karen, can you take over for just a second? I have to get the door. 1 second.
Absolutely. The perils of working from home and how that affects the way we work. Actually, this, as you can see here, these profiles are comprised of interviews that we do with these companies. We try to update them as frequently as we can, at least once every 6 months, if possible. And these are really about finding out what the investors are looking for and what stage they're investing in, even how much they're willing to invest. And these profiles actually form the basis of our partnering profiles, as Isla just asked if the search function is available at Resi. Yes, the partnering platform isn't opened yet. So you can't do the search, you can't see this tool yet, Isla, but when we launch on Monday, you will get to see the profiles of all of the investors who are registered, and those are based on these profiles. Yep.
And the kind of information that we curate. So you see there's lots of different types of investors here. All of these are doing cross-border stuff. So if we look at a typical VC, 5AM Ventures. Hang on 1 second. The kind of information that we curate looks like this. And as Karen mentioned, this information, at least part of it, is uploaded to our partnering platform for Resi. And the important thing there is that you'll really be able to identify the investors who are a fit for you to reach out for meetings. And I don't think any other conference does that, that level of identification of the investors. Typically, the investors have to update their own information on other conference platforms. So we think this is really helpful for you. And you can see the scope of this particular investor. They invest in the US and Canada. You get some kind of general information about the VC. And then this mandate section, this is really the powerful part of the database, because this information is granular. It's taken in a personal interview by one of our colleagues. In this case, you can see here is my colleague Jessica, who in a personal interview with this investor, took down this information on allocation, on the subsectors, sectors and subsectors of interest, management team requirements, and then, really importantly, we identify the investor, and then how do you reach out to them? And, interested companies should that meet these criteria. It says who are the people to reach out to, what is their email, and, you should mention LSN when you reach out. So the important thing here, and there was a question earlier about, can you do a cold outreach and not not be too bothersome in your continued outreach. This person listed here on the database is expecting to hear from companies through our database and through the Resi conference. So so no, it's not something that's going to bother anyone. So once you have all this information and you really understand, then we have contact information at that particular investment firm. And you can see this is a pretty large firm based in San Francisco. Okay, so back to the presentation. So that is the LSN Investor Database, and that is a very powerful tool to create that global target list of investors. But of course, it's not the only way to create a target list. You can do it on Google, and you can do it by reading the industry publications, the online publications, and read about investors and find out who to contact. But it's very time consuming and very cumbersome to do that. So a database is something that will streamline your creation of a global target list of investors and help you be more effective. Because as we like to say at Life Science Nation, fundraising is a numbers game. And if you can reach out to 300 potential investors, your chances will be much better in finding the right investors than if you reach out to 30. So that's the philosophy behind this. Now, we don't have a lot of time, and I want to go to the partnering because that's really, I think, one of the key elements of preparing for JP Morgan Week, whether you're coming to Resi or another conference. But I will just say, and like I said, we can share these slides with you, that the importance of branding and messaging is that it will help you, break through all of the noise that's happening in the marketplace. And companies that do not clearly tell their story and in a very compelling way and catch the attention of investors to get that first meeting, and then during that first meeting to get a second meeting. Because after all, when you go to a conference, any conference, your only goal in that meeting with an investor is to get a second meeting. Because you're not going to close any investment round or finish anything up in this first meeting. But you have to be extremely successful in getting their attention. And the way to do that is to have the right marketing collateral and for it to be spot on, concise and compelling. And it's made up of these elements that we don't have time to go through today. The branding and messaging part of the bootcamp can be up to a 2-hour class. We're not going to do that today, but we are, this is something that we're always happy to talk about with you at Life Science Nation. So feel free to reach out to any of the BD staff, myself or any of my colleagues, and we can talk about your marketing collateral. This is the one-page data sheet that I think is extremely useful. Karen has a lot of experience. She and her colleagues have a lot of experience using this as an initial outreach to investors. And this is 2 different ones. And don't try to read it because I know the letters are really small. But the point here is that it's easy to navigate. You have the key points on a sidebar. You have some additional information that can be different for each particular company. But investors appreciate having this summary of what the investment opportunity is on a one-pager. So with that, because we don't have a lot of time, I would like to turn this over to my colleague, Karen, to talk about partnering.
Okay, thank you, Greg. So what is successful partnering and how do we do it? If we could move forward, Greg. So this is what you're used to seeing as partnering in a lot of events. And this is what our partnering event looked like, as little as a year ago. That's not going to be happening for the near future, and we hope to get back to it. But, you know, this is kind of what you expect to see with a lot of people interacting at tables and talking. But how do you get to that point? So if we can move on. So as Greg mentioned, we have all of these events that are taking place over the year. Currently, they're all virtual with all of the one-on-one meetings taking place, but using these events is a great way to schedule one-on-one meetings to not only meet new investors, but also to maintain relationships with investors. Because as Greg mentioned, getting a fundraising deal is a long-term thing. And so you want to have meetings. And in addition, it's also a great way to catch up with investors who you may be contacting over time, but may find out that you may be, let's just say, a little too early for them. It's a great way to get back in touch to say, hey, I want to catch up to let you know what we've done in the past few months. Here is the new data that we have. And that way you can get your foot in the door. So when you do reach the right stage, you already have that relationship in place and you can smooth things along to make the rest of it go faster. Next slide. So what we really want to go over in this part of the presentation is how to create a good profile for your company in the partnering platform. You know, what you should do when you're spending time, you know, developing an outbound meeting request, what it should contain, and that sort of information. The going through requesting as many meetings as possible for investors who are a fit and following up frequently. So for your profile creation, so first of all, we cannot emphasize enough the importance of actually filling out your profile. It is no end of frustration to us when we get a company to come to Resi, we want them to do really well, and then they don't end up even filling out their profile. It's very, very frustrating to see, and it doesn't make a great impression on investors either to, you know, when they're scrolling through the companies that are registered for Resi and they come across a completely blank profile. So the first thing that you want to do is fill that out, and it gives you a place to upload a logo, your website if you have one, uploading an investor deck and an executive summary as well, so that investors can see those documents. There are some text sections of the profile that, you know, shouldn't take too long to fill out, just paragraphs of information. And this will really give you a head start where not only can investors see your profile and request meetings with you, but once you've requested a meeting with an investor, they can come take a look at your profile and get a lot more information that you will be putting in that introductory message. So as Greg mentioned before, we can share a sample tear sheet, like a tear sheet example that you can use to work on if you would like, in order to kind of get an idea. But the great thing about a tear sheet is that it gives you like a one-page snapshot of your company. And it's kind of like a condensed version of your executive summary. And you can put information like your pipeline or where your product is at or other information. But the really good thing about a tear sheet is that it really forces you to focus your message, because there's a limited amount of information that you can put on there, and it helps you kind of boil down what is your message to investors, what is absolutely important for them to know, and how to express that concisely. So for your introduction, your first outbound meeting request to an investor, of course, the key thing is you want to introduce yourself and your company, you know, where your company is based, what sector you're in, what your technology is, what problem you're trying to solve, whether that's a cure for a specific disease, some sort of medical device, a diagnostic, or even a digital health, whatever it may be. So that information is important to put in there. Your key value proposition. So what differentiates you? Why are you solving this problem in a unique way? Why should the investor be interested in you? That is one thing you definitely want to make sure to highlight, because you know, these investors, they get hundreds and hundreds they see hundreds and hundreds of companies throughout the year. And so you want to really make sure that you are letting them know right off the bat what makes you unique, what makes you special. Why should they be interested in investing in you? You should also include what stage you're fundraising, how much you're looking to raise, and what milestones you're looking to achieve with this fundraise. Just, you know, a really quick snapshot of, I am raising $5 million to complete the IND studies that I need in order to get to phase 1, whatever it may be. And you know, another good thing to add is to customize the message to the investor. Say, you know, I've seen that you've invested in this, this, and this, and it's similar to what I'm doing. Or I've seen that, you know, on your website, you're interested in such and such a thing, just to make it so that they know that you've looked at them ahead of time. You're not just doing a generic message and throwing it out there to see who it hits. And then make sure to request a meeting, especially when you're in our partnering platform. You have 2 options, either book a meeting or send a message. Make sure to do it under book a meeting, because then it's a meeting request rolled into one with a message. And, you know, it makes it easier for everything to be navigated.
Karen, okay, I'm not able to share my screen. I just wanted to add that I've seen so many companies send a really weak introduction message when they're in the partnering platform, and you know, like as simple as, "Hey, my company is called Bob's Biotech, and I hope we can meet at Resi." Seriously, there are companies that don't add any information at all. They just say, "This is the name of my company. I'm attending Resi, and I would like to meet with you." This doesn't help the investor at all in deciding, you know, what companies to meet with. And every investor has a, you know, limited time, you know, a limited number of meeting slots that they can take. So you're really defeating the purpose if you don't do this. So
Yeah.
I can't stress the importance enough.
Yeah, and plus it also, if you don't take the time to put together a good message, the investors can tell, and you know, they're less likely to take a meeting with you if they think that you're not putting in your maximum effort, because it leaves them with a poor impression. And so that's kind of, you know, the really big thing about this. Yeah. So here's an example of a meeting request. And I won't go through all of the text, but you know, it really highlights everything. And this was a company that got a lot of meetings. What we have also seen some companies do is they'll put together a few, like, you know, 2 different messages, and they'll start, you know, sending them out, and they'll see which message gets them the most traction, and then they'll use that one for the rest of their outreach. But I mean, if you don't want to, like, I mean, but the key is really to put forward an effort into giving a concise snapshot of your company to investors, with what really highlights your company. So as we mentioned before, you want to send as many meeting requests as you can. And of course, there's a caveat on that you want to make sure that the meeting requests are only to investors who are a fit. You don't want to just spam all of the investors at Resi, because they're not all going to be a fit for you. So what you want to do is make sure to go through all of the registered investors, make sure they're a fit, and then highlight the ones that are fit and do all of your outreach to all of them. And, you know, make sure that once you're registered for Resi, to check partnering every few days to see what investors we add, because we will be adding investors from the date partnering opens to the day of the conference. So you want to make sure you're keeping up to date with any investors that we add and start your outreach to them too. But as you can see, companies that send, you know, 50 to 60 meeting requests are the ones that end up getting the most meetings booked. Now, this was when we were doing This data was collected from when we were doing only 16 meetings at a conference on the day of the like when it was a day of conference and it was face-to-face and there were only 16 meeting slots. We've seen companies do a lot better than this now that it's virtual and it's over 3 days. So again, we cannot emphasize enough the importance of sending out meeting requests to any investors that could be a fit for you. So as we mentioned before, it's really important to follow up. And as I said before, you don't want to just send a follow-up saying, hey, I just wanted to see if you're interested in meeting. We recommend that you definitely include more information with every message you send. So your first one is a general, this is my company, this is what we're doing, this is why we're special, and this is what we're raising. When you're doing a first follow-up, then, hey, let's do a more focus on your technology, a little bit more information about your technology, how it works, how it's been developed, and all of those things. Excuse me. Your next message could be something, focus on the market, like what market you're addressing, how you're thinking about entering, where you can expand in your future, like how you're starting and where you're going. Your next message could be focusing on the management team, what their experience, why they're qualified for this, what makes them special. So for your next follow-up, if you have the investor's email, which if you have gotten the Premier partnering, you do have that email, you can send them an email with an attachment of some kind, because you can't do that within the partnering system. And so you can do, you can send a fourth follow-up with the tear sheet or an executive summary or something like that. If you don't have Premier and you can't send it to them by email, you can always create a link, post it somewhere where you can send them the link, like post it on your website or something like that. It doesn't even have to be something that's searchable, but that they can see with a link that you send them. So really what is important, to really think about, that we really want you to do, is that we really want you to think about when you're approaching this partnering at a conference, is that it's really about the effort that you put into it. And, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work during the prep to the conference. But the effort you put in a lot of times is what you get out. And if you have any questions about the messaging or anything like that, if you want advice, reach out to your BD rep at LSN, and we would be more than happy to help you.
Yep, and I would just say that I would add that we do partnering tutorials explaining how to use the actual platform. We usually do 3 or 4 of those when partnering opens. So that would be next week for the JPM conference. But those are really useful too, to understand the tools that are available on the actual platform to get the most out of it.
Okay.
All right. Well, we are just about on the hour. Are there any other questions? I think we do have. So we have a couple of questions from Ayla. We can share the sample tear sheet. Unfortunately, it's just a template. It's not one for a specific company or a specific type of technology. But we can definitely share that, as we will also share the today's presentation slides.
Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you everyone for being part of this. And again, if you have any more questions after this, feel free to reach out. We have a question about how we will be distributing the slides.
I guess it'll be a PDF in an email. Super.
Okay.
Thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you, everyone.